Hey everyone, welcome back to Comic Corps with Jimmy. I am Jimmy with a awesome writer. You guys know him from Flintstones to Wonder Twins to Judge Dredd. Welcome, Mark Russell. How you doing?
Doing good. Doing good. Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem, man. I'm just happy you said yes because we got some stuff to talk about. I like to get into people's heads when we start talking, especially the way you write. So let's look at the chat real quick. Lord is here. That's kind of cool because you wrote Second Coming. That makes sense. Eric Breen, the old man who's collected every Marvel book since the 60s, and I do mean every single book. He's here, so he's our Wikipedia guy.
Hope he has a big house because that's a lot of collecting.
Oh, he sold it. He used to have like 3 rooms of just straight books, and so yeah. All right, let's get into the first thing. I don't know how you got into comic books and how you got into writing.
I don't really know either. I got into writing. I don't think I really got into writing. I've always written as long as I can remember. Oh, even since like I was in grade school and stuff, I would just write just because it seemed to be like, the only sort of valve I had for my imagination. If nothing else, I could just write something down. It's just something I've always done. I didn't start writing like books, like things that would be published and read by other people in large format until 2013. I had my first book published, God Is Disappointed in You, which is a modern retelling of the Bible. So that's what kind of started my professional literary career. But I've always written. It just always seemed natural to me. It's like, like somebody who goes like skiing on the weekends. I would write. That was my skiing.
That's awesome. And like your first book just so happens to relate to Second Coming because I was reading that prior to this, and I was like, man, he really delved deep into his interpretation of what religion is. And I really appreciated it from like a both standpoint of your right to express yourself religiously any way you want, and also not giving a fuck what people say.
Yeah, one thing it is very closely related to God Is Disappointed in You, but one thing I discovered when doing the research for God Is Disappointed in You is like how wrong people got the Bible, like, especially, my own upbringing, how wrong I had gotten the Bible as a kid, how it was sort of mistaught to me. And that was like really sort of like one of the major premises of Second Coming was like Christ coming back to earth to find out how wrong everybody got what he had been saying the first time around. And really how little people actually know about the Bible. I mean, I thought I was brought up in a pretty strict church. We went to church twice a week, and I went to religious schools. And so I thought I was pretty knowledgeable about the Bible. I thought that banging out a book about the Bible was going to be pretty easy for me. But it still took me 3 years of research because I had to unlearn a lot of the stuff I thought I knew. And also because I realized that a lot of what I've been taught in the Bible was really just 1% of what is actually in there. I just got taught the parts of the Bible that were useful for the people who were teaching me. So there's so much more in there.
And the end of the first issue, your author's note, where it said, how can, if Peter, David, and someone else, I can't remember, didn't even fully understand what Jesus wanted for them, how could the guy who does welding teaching Sunday school know?
That's what, most sort of evangelical sort of American Christians are. They're amateur theologians. And I'm not saying that in a diminutive way. Mm-hmm. We're all amateur theologians. But with that, you have to sort of tamp down your own hubris and realize that you're coming at this with very incomplete information and that you're not really an expert. You're just somebody who is struggling to figure out what God wants from them, the same way that the authors of the New Testament were themselves struggling to learn to come to terms with Christianity. And yeah, most of the New Testament, when you read it for yourself, is actually them arguing with each other about what is meant by the teachings of Christ.
Because it's so weird, because the First Testament, God put out like the 10 commandments, and these are the laws to get to heaven if you want to get to heaven. And then when the New Testament came around, they were like, forget everything about that because you can't follow that to a T in just being a human. So here's what I thought what God wants from us. And then everyone was like, no, this is what I thought for what God wants for us. And it all got like it became like a weird mess, and we got confused through history of just what actually he wanted.
Yeah, and I think confusing things more was the fact that Christianity was created as a religion for the powerless. It was created as a religion for people who couldn't violently overthrow the Roman Empire, but could overthrow them spiritually by not playing by the rules, by forgiving instead of seeking revenge, by doing things for God as opposed to doing them for money. And that was what the Christian religion was really about. It's like, well, we don't have enough soldiers or spears to get rid of the Romans by force, but we can do the worst thing an empire can possibly imagine, which is to drop out, basically, to not make ourselves useful to empire, which was I think one of the things that was so attractive about Christianity early on. But the problem is the thing that sort of like really made it awkward for Christianity is when it became the official religion of an empire.
Right.
And then how do you make use of this message of dropping out and not playing ball with an empire when you are teaching this religion as the Roman Empire? And so they had to sort of co-opt the message and tweak it and pervert it in order to make it useful to the powers of empire. And it sort of remained that sort of betrayal of the original sort of teachings of Christ ever since.
And that also, like, I'm going to go back to the second coming again. That relates back to second coming because God's like, why don't you be like this guy, Superman, a guy who is the embodiment of hope. And that's what I feel like Christianity totally forgot halfway through personally is it's all about hope also, because it's all about what's going to happen after you die. Like Christians, they want to get to heaven, but they don't really want to die to get there. So,
there's really not a lot about heaven in the afterlife in the New Testament. That was like one of the ways in which the Roman Empire sort of made Christianity sort of useful to the powers of empire. It's like, well, if you die in our service, if you die, serving the Pope or the Emperor, you will go to heaven. And so you don't have to, you can fight without fear. Or, if you just trust us, and we will intercede on your behalf with God, and we'll make sure your sins are forgiven in the afterlife. And I think that's one of the key perversions of that's happened to Christianity, which is very much about forgiveness and finding ways to relate with other human beings that aren't based on revenge and evening the score constantly. I think one of the ways that empires have sort of co-opted that is by making it not about you seeking forgiveness from the person you've wronged and setting things right with the people that you've harmed in your life, but asking them for forgiveness for you harming another person. It's like there's a scene in Second Coming, one of the issues, I don't think it's come out yet, but where like somebody's asking Christ for forgiveness for something they've done to somebody else, and Christ is like, well, what are you asking me for? Go talk to the person you actually wronged.
Right. And like also like it perverted it in Christianity also a little bit. The church, once they saw how much money they were bringing in, they started going, well, you can buy your way to heaven, giving out heaven certificates near the Martin Luther era, and that's why he did his thesis.
Right, indulgences. They were selling indulgences, and I think that was one of the ways they made Christianity, which is the ultimate sort of religion against empires, made it useful for empires. It's like, well, you can do good works, you can do good things in a roundabout way. You can just pay us and leave us in charge of the good works, and then go about your merry way, committing usury or abusing widows and orphans, and it's okay because you've already sort of preempted the eternal damnation with this gift to the church. And
that's also relates to the issue in the Flintstones, where at a certain point when he was taking all this money and he had all the material stuff because he had everyone's money in Bedrock, he just goes, I'm really not doing the right thing here, and gave it all back. And that's where I was like, oh wow, he really delved deep in that.
Yeah, this is one of the pitfalls of religion. And the priest, priest of the Church of Gerald, sort of discovers this to his credit, that like he's kind of gone off the rails, because once he starts sort of like accepting this sort of bribe in exchange for absolution, then people just start like factoring that into the calculus when they're doing horrible things to each other. It's like, well, I'd really like to punch my brother out. So if I just pay up, a few gold coins ahead of time, it's, it'll be worth it. The money I spend to get away with, like killing a man or beating up somebody is worth it. You start thinking, well, is this murder, this adultery worth the what it's going to cost me? And if you decide yes, then we're basically in the same place we were before, where your version of right or wrong is based upon a cost benefit analysis of how well you can get away with it, rather than like whether or not it is like good for your soul, or whether or not it's justified in doing that to another human being.
Yeah. So let's change the subject a little bit. Your writing process, because I don't think I've ever met someone who's a satire writer. So I don't even know how to start with writing satire with that. How do you do that? Well, I think how do you do it, but like, what is the mindset, I should say?
Well, for me, I think the important thing is to think in terms of the metaphor. Like, what is this a metaphor for? Like, for example, the Flintstones was like the first civilization was kind of a metaphor for our civilization. Although, they're making what are obviously like really stupid, boneheaded mistakes because they're the first civilization. They've never run into these problems before. They've never, run into like televised media or material possession. So this is all very new to them. So in a way, they have an excuse for getting these things wrong. In a way, we don't. But they make exactly the same mistakes we do. It's just more obvious to us that those are mistakes because they're this sort of fledgling, bungling civilization. So I think that's largely what it is. It's like, well, what's the metaphor? What is I'm trying to say here? And then how do I put it as blunt a way as possible?
So I guess we could like mix the next subject along with the writing process, which was the next subject was Flintstone. So we'll just go into it. Holy crap. I just want to tell you, I'm going to give you probably the highest praise I can give. I've only read three books that once I got done reading, I instantly started over and just read it again, which was Hellboy in Hell, Thor: God of Thunder, Jason Aaron, and Superman Earth 1. 3 terrific ones. And then now your 4th one, because it's so weird. I've never read anything like this. I never thought I would be crying over a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, I consider that like probably my greatest literary accomplishment is getting people to cry over the death of a vacuum cleaner, especially one that wasn't theirs.
Yeah,
but yeah, thanks. Yeah, that is like sort of the ultimate compliment you can give a writer is that I read your book twice.
Exactly,
because it was worth reading, but not so easily digested that once you were through it, you're like, I got it, and I'm ready to move on. Which I think is what you aspire to. You aspire to write something that sort of haunts people, that like they can't stop thinking about, or that they immediately have to go through because they're not confident they understood it all, but they know that there's more and they're worth understanding. Like
also like because of that, directly when we meet the vacuum cleaner, he is talking to the bowling ball, who's an armadillo for people who don't know, and he goes, "What are friends?" You're like, wow, this guy is just so secluded, and to the point where he doesn't even know what a friend is.
Yeah, and I think that's true of a lot of us. Yeah, that because we've been reduced to like functions and roles in our society rather than who we really are. And
we're also trying to impress all the time, which changes who we fundamentally are.
There, as Hannah Arendt once said, there is who we are, and then there is what we are. And so much of us live our lives in the realm of what we are, the roles that we play and what we are in relation to other people and to our jobs, that we don't spend enough time exploring really who we are. And I think that's sort of the central metaphor of the household appliances in the Flintstones, is these are really representatives of all of us, but all of us stripped away of our individual identity because we're just functions. We're just household equipment for somebody's, mansion.
Right. That explains so much of the book now to me. Also, in the book, you go into, coming from a military background, the veterans aspect of that. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's like the cardinal sin the original sin of any great civilization is the fact that they had to get rid of the people who were on that land before. You know, it's true of
All right.
American civilization. It's true of like pretty much every civilization in history. And so there is this sort of blood stain that on civilization at the very beginning, before it's even really had a chance to make the mistakes that civilization's done. There's this like sort of like skeleton in the closet, which is called genocide. And that's really what I
that
wanted to
scene,
do.
holy shit, dude. Out of nowhere, he just goes, "We committed genocide." And that was just like, and Barney just threw it away like it was
Yeah.
nothing.
Well, and I think that this is like the great trick of like empires is that they find a way to sort of trick people to do things morally that they would never do if left to their own devices. If he'd gone to Fred and Barney and said, "Hey, you want to join in? We're wiping out the tree people and committing this genocide. You want to jump in?" They would have said no. But they sort of, like most civilizations do, trick you into imagining that you're committing this genocide out of self-defense, or that you're somehow justified in murdering other people.
Innocent children and women.
Right. Or that at the very least that this is inevitable and it's going to happen anyway, so you might as well benefit from it. And this is sort of the central lie of empires, that we have to conquer because otherwise they're going to kill us. And you end up being the very thing that you're being warned against.
It's just fear mongering.
Right. And it's a way of like turning people with very real turning people with very real desires to protect their friends and family into predators, into monsters. Mm-hmm. And this is what Fred and Barney realize has been done to them. They've been made useful to do something they never would have done on their own. And that's sort of the original sin of society, and it's also the price that is ultimately paid by the veterans, the people who are co-opted into doing the will of the empire, because then they not only are killed or maimed, but then they have to deal with the PTSD. They have to deal with the guilt of decisions they never made.
Yeah, I won't forget the time when I was watching I think it was 13 Hours with John Krasinski with my father, who was ex-Special Forces, went to Gulf and Panama. Mm-hmm. And when he was talking about just what he was doing, he goes, "Yeah, I did that move too." And I was like, "Do you have any scars like him?" He goes, "Yeah, I have scars." I was like, he pointed to one. He goes, "That's from a knife I got stabbed." I was like, "What happened to the other guy?" The look on his face was just like it sunk. And then he just goes, the politest way you could tell, like a kid saying the bad guy went away.
Yeah. No, even the people who win are themselves victims of this imperial decision. The empire is ultimately built on human sacrifice, and in the end, everybody involved is sacrificed in one way or another.
And I liked in this though, because I'm taking criminal justice in college right now. So in this, I liked how you also played in the fact with the generals. They were kind of there, but they didn't really do anything. They were kind of just like, "Here, you do that, you do that," and that's kind of like something sad because back in Roman time, the general was on the battlefield also fighting along with the soldiers. And nowadays, it's more like they're hiding behind desks.
Well, I think that, there's got to be 2 degrees separation between yourself and any great crime if you really want to, like, not absorb it and be if you want people to commit great crimes over and over again, they generally need to sort of remove themselves from the actual commission of their crime. It's why, you have things like generals or, mob bosses, people who don't have to get their hands dirty and therefore can continue to make these decisions without any sort of moral misgiving because they aren't seeing the cost of it on the front lines. It's why, they give soldiers tours of duty where you're in for a year and then you're out, because they realize that eventually that's going to just cripple a person mentally and emotionally to be out there in that sort of, having to like kill people and burn villages for too long. They're going to just disintegrate mentally and morally. So you swap them in and out, and the only people that stay are the people making the decisions because they can live with it, because they're not the ones actually like having to like plunge the knife into someone's heart.
Paulo Acosta asked, "Do you know the world? I think he's trying to say Newton universe."
No, I haven't heard that. It's like a fan theory.
Yeah, it connects apparently time traveling Flintstone, the Flintstones and time traveling Tarzan, something like that.
No, that's a new one to me. I've heard the theory that the Flintstones are actually set in the future in a post-apocalyptic world, and that's why they have facsimiles of cars and airplanes and whatnot, because they're used to these things. That wasn't obviously the premise that my Flintstones was based on, but
yeah,
but
yours was based on. I really dug the concept that you just took everything that you thought was. I'm assuming you thought that was like wrong with nowadays and just blamed it on the Flintstones.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I thought, this could be the last comic book I ever write, because I was very new to comics, and the career wasn't going exceedingly well at that point. So I thought, like, this could be the last comic book I ever write. So I might as well say everything I have to say about why I think the world is on a path to self-destruction. So I tried to cram all that into the Flintstones, like basically where civilization had made its foundational errors, and why we were heading towards the cliff.
And a big part of it was the consumerism, right?
Yeah, stripping our environment of resources, and basically, destroying the ecosystem that we need to live in exchange for plastic bags and
right.
Teletubbies and garbage.
So a question Breen also asked, Betty or Wilma? Which one do you prefer? I don't know.
Like romantically?
I think he means like character wise.
Oh, okay, that's a better question. But I think the one that I was kind of drawn to more was Wilma, just because I think Wilma in a lot of ways was me speaking about my own sort of like anxieties as an artist, is like my own sort of like feeling that like I'm making paintings that nobody really understands. Everyone just thinks they're sort of juvenile and sort of primitive, and nobody really understands what I'm actually trying to say with them. So I feel like I was trying to like dump a lot of my own sort of frustrations as a writer into Wilma as an artist. Nice. Which ironically, the Flintstones was kind of, I think, the first time people were like, "Oh, I really get what you're saying." So
before I read Flintstones, I didn't really understand your writing, and then when I read Flintstones, I was like, "Oh, he's doing this," and then when I went back and reread Wonder Twins, I was like, this makes a lot more sense, and I dug it.
Thanks. Yeah, and I feel like that, like for at the time I was writing it, I felt like Wilma making these handprint paintings on the cave, which meant an incredible amount to me personally, but that everybody else just saw. I was like, oh great, yeah, another cave painting. Wow, we really need another one of those.
Yeah. So a big part of the Flintstones was the mental, I want to say, part of Fred. His only thing in life was to not lose Wilma.
And I think he wanted to hang on to everything that he had, and he had so little. But I think this is what, once you settle down and start, owning physical objects, and you have like a family, and you're all together, it's like you worry about your big. The more your society is obsessed with accumulation and possession, the more your anxiety comes from loss of that accumulation.
Mm-hmm. So before we end the Flintstones topic, how did you get the Flintstones? Did you go, I wanted to write the Flintstones?
No, in fact, I didn't really want to write the Flintstones. But wow. the DC got the Hanna-Barbera properties, and they liked the work I did on Prez, even though I don't think really it sold very well, and I don't think many people bought it. But they liked it enough that they wanted to give me another shot, and they offered me the Flintstones, and I said, well, okay, I got to be honest though, I'm not a big fan of the Flintstones. I don't remember ever laughing at a single one of those cartoons. And they're like, oh, well, that's great, because then you'll have your own take. You're not going to just try to make some like honorific homage to the old cartoon. You'll do something on your own. And that's when it clicked to me. Like, yeah, I should totally write the Flintstones, because I can use this to say what I want to say.
Exactly.
I can use this to talk about. That's what I try to do now with pretty much any time I take like an existing property. Well, what is it I love about it? What is it that this will allow me to talk about that I really want to talk about? In the Flintstones, it was like basically civilization and how human nature, because you're talking about humans like right at the dawn of time, right at the beginning of history. And so it allowed me to talk about things I felt very passionately about, though through the lens of a Flintstones comic book. But yeah, I got it pretty much just because they got these new Hanna-Barbera properties, and they just needed writers that were willing to take them on.
That's good. Will we ever see another iteration of Flintstones, do you think?
I don't know, because DC doesn't really have the rights to them anymore.
Oh, they don't?
So I wouldn't say never, because somebody else could pick up Hanna-Barbera, or they could go back to DC, in which case I'd be, if I could work with Steve again, I'd be more than happy to do some more.
Oh, that art was amazing.
Yeah, it really is such a big part of, I think, what the character of the Flintstones comic book is, just that Steve's sensibility and his mastery of like sort of facial expressions, and so much of the comedy and the meaning is just through his like artwork.
And also he's such a big, bulky, almost ape-like person, but on the inside he's just he's like
a sort of a lovable lummox. He's like a big sort of imposing dude, but he's got a heart heart really is sort of basic decency.
Right. So needless to say, after reading it on Comixology, I went out and bought it. So I hope you enjoy the royalties.
I'm sure I will eventually.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I'll go out and buy a popsicle on you.
Oh, let's go, man. All right. Wonder Comics. How did you get into that?
Well, I was doing a panel with Brian Michael Bendis at Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle.
My hero.
Yeah, he's amazing. If you want to learn how to write a comic book, there's your guy.
I have the book actually.
And
pictures.
And he, like, after the panel, he said he told me how much he liked the Flintstones, and he said, I'm setting up a new line at DC, because DC had just signed him over exclusive for Marvel.
Now, was this before his sickness or after?
It was after.
Okay, good.
Yeah, he had this horrible sickness, for those who don't know, and like on death's door, and recovered. And then after that, he went to DC. And he was recovered after that point, and said, I'm starting this new line at DC called Wonder Comics, which is about, sort of like a YA, sort of like teenage comic superheroes. And he said, I would really like you to write the Wonder Twins, which I think at the time he kind of meant sort of apologetically, like, I'm sorry about this, but just hear me out. I'd like you to write the Wonder Twins, because I think he thought he was saying that he thought I was like a punchline or something. But I love the Wonder Twins. I didn't even hesitate. I just said yes, because. Did
you watch the original Wonder Friends show?
Yeah, I loved the Super Friends when I was a kid. It was like one of the few cartoons like I religiously watched when I was a kid.
Nice.
And I always liked the Wonder Twins because they were the superheroes who were allowed to sort of make mistakes. They were the ones who weren't expected to be perfect, the ones who weren't like given the sort of finger wag, civic lesson at the end, like Superman or Batman, telling kids not to swim in pools or not to take candy from strangers. So I like the Wonder Twins because they were the ones who kind of got into trouble. So I thought that was great.
And that it's so weird because it's like such a nostalgia factor. When I heard Wonder Twins was coming out, I was like, awesome. Sort of. Yeah. I was like, it's gonna be weird.
I think that's my sort of up until that point, that had been my reputation in comics, is like, this guy's taking on like a comic that sounds like the worst idea ever.
Right. Oh,
it's like, I remember at the time they announced Flintstones, we were like, why would anybody write a Flintstones comic book? Why would anybody who thought this was a good idea?
You showed them though. Don't worry. So the Wonder Twins, 12 issues, and it's it's really weird because how do you make an action comic book out of a person who turns to water and someone who can turn to almost any animal? So I'm pretty sure I can understand the animal, but the water is the one that gets me.
Well, and yeah, granted, these are pretty limiting superpowers, but that's part of what I think the attraction is to Wonder Twins, because they're, something like just flight or super strength is kind of boring. So we've seen it through so many heroes, and they obviously all kind of use it the same way through beating up supervillains or carrying people through the air, the two or three things you can do with super strength and flight that we've all kind of see 100 times in comics. Whereas you have to be a little more creative if your power is turning into a puddle of water.
Right. That's why I appreciated David and Brian's on issue 14 of Young Justice, something like that, where they had some of the Teen Titans also show up they had like Aqualad, and I was like, okay, they're in the desert. How is this going to happen? But Aqualad used Zan. And I was like, now that is badass.
Yeah, and I think that they're actually more useful powers than you would think at first, because when you think about like Zan being able to like turn into water, he could demolecularize and be like into like all these little molecules of water and basically cover an entire city at once. Going through like the pipes and the plumbing, and he could basically like search an entire city at once just by his molecules of water just sort of going throughout a city. And a lot of what he does is he uses his power in reverse. Like in the old cartoons, you think he's going to turn into something made out of ice or water, and then that's what's going to be used. But a lot of times he just like turns into water before the villain even gets there. And then when the villain shows up, doesn't see anyone around, then he turns back into Zan and is there ready to do something. Or like, hide inside a water fountain. And then when they go down to get a drink, he'll come out and like round kick him like as he's coming out of the water fountain.
What really killed me about Wonder Twins was I think it was the end of issue 5 and leading into 6, where the scientist, what's his name? Math.
Philomath.
Yeah, Philomath. He actually becomes a villain and joins the League of Annoyance. And it really hurt me because he did that for his daughter, and then when he dies, spoiler alert, anyone, his daughter ends up becoming a villain, even though she didn't have the full picture.
Yeah, and I think that this is what the point I was trying to make with Wonder Twins is that there's really not this stark moral division between good guys and bad guys, that we all kind of respond to incentives in our lives. And sometimes people, that's the only incentive they have. That's the only opportunity laid out for them is to do something criminal, is to do something that is technically, beyond the law. That's illegal, because that's all you've been sort of like cornered to the point where that's the only decision you can make if you want to like be able to support your family. And that's
sort of like the school to jail pipeline, if you heard
right, exactly. And that was like the only alternative left to Philomath. Also, I don't know if anybody needs this explanation, but I'm going to provide it regardless. But the names Philomath and his daughter Polymath are kind of like chosen because a Philomath is like a means lover of knowledge, and Polymath means somebody who knows a lot about a lot of different things. So that's kind of what I was trying to do with those, is like represent like how like people who are, mentally gifted and have all the tools to make it in society and to be real contributors are sometimes forced by their upbringing or by their by factors, by people's prejudice against them to not being productive. And that's the real crime, is that not that these people are breaking the law, but that society has basically forced these people who should be like contributing to society into being criminals instead.
Right. So sorry. People keep bringing up Red Sonja. Excuse me if my ignorance, but did you do Red Sonja?
I'm doing Red Sonja.
Wow.
Yeah, it's currently I'm doing 24 issues, and I think we're on issue 21 now. Comes up next week. But yeah, it's been a 24 issue run with my own sort of like mythology and sort of my own sort of tweak on the Hyborian age, I guess you'd say.
Nice. Are you going to do Conan? Because that'd be interesting.
I might. I wouldn't say no, but I have no immediate plans to do Conan.
Okay. So I don't know Red Sonja. I've only been reading comics for about almost 3 years now. Kind of new. So I basically summarize it down to I started when Jason Aaron started his Avengers run. So
Yeah.
that's when I joined. So I don't know much about Red Sonja. Who's Red Sonja?
Red Sonja is an orphan from the steplands of Hyrcania, which is sort of like the analog for Hyrcania, I guess would be like sort of the Russian steppes. And she was orphaned at an early age. Her parents were killed by raiders, and she became this sort of badass warrior as a result of that. And so in my story, she is sort of tricked, hoodwinked into becoming the queen of Hyrcania because they know that Hyrcania is about to be invaded by the most powerful man on the planet, Dragon the Magnificent.
Nice.
And they don't want the people, the nobility of like Hyrcania don't want to be around when he shows up in town. So they sort of hand her the crown and like ditch town really quickly. And so she finds herself in the position of having to sort of defend this tribe of nomads and sort of morally questionable, thieves and scavengers, this poor country against the biggest army in the world.
Nice.
And it's more about her using her mind and her leadership and her strategic knowledge to save the day than it is about her just sort of like stabbing people and kicking ass.
Nice. I think that reminds me of a quote from the better of the films versus Indiana Jones, but not Indiana Jones, the better version, which is The Librarians from TNT. And in it, the first movie says it's not what you can think here, but what you feel here. Ooh, not what you think here, but what you feel here. But don't distract from here also.
Yeah, I think that people try to pit your intellect and your emotions against each other, but they really are sort of two answers to completely different questions. Your brain and your intellect and your reason is there to tell you how to get what you desire, but your heart is there to tell you what you should desire.
Right. Paula says Roy Thomas based a Hyborian Red Sonja on a character called Red Sonja, same name, just different one-letter difference, from a Robert E. Howard story set during the Ottoman siege of Vienna.
Oh, I had no idea.
I had no idea. I didn't even know Roy Thomas did this. This is all new to me. So
there are a lot of historical analogs between Howard's Red Sonja and Earth history, actual Earth history. And I tried to sort of continue that tradition in my Red Sonja I use a lot of little anecdotes and sort of facsimiles of characters from the histories of Herodotus in my Red Sonja. So some people, students of ancient history, might recognize some of the characters. Oh, and her mentor is this this guy named Domo, a master of war in Kitai, who is like obviously an analog for Sun Tzu.
Oh, that's awesome. When I was my freshman year, I took East Asian culture and we had to read The Art of War, and which I still have. And that's just hearing that enlightens me. I'm going to have to go read your Red Sonja now. Okay. Eric Breen is my co-host for a different sort of thing I do called Educating Jimmy, because I'm new to comics and I don't know a lot of back issues because I like modern shit. Eric Breen says we are diligently working to educate Jimmy on comics.
I'm diligently working to educate myself on comics because I've only been in comics for about 5 years, and I wasn't like I wasn't like a collector or like a heavy reader of comics before. So beyond like Neil Gaiman or Alan Moore, I didn't know too much about comics like I did. But I feel like somebody who's just like discovered a new room in his house. Like
nice.
This great like den and that's been in my house the whole time, and I never knew just because I never opened this door. Yep. And so it's been a great experience to sort of walk in and discover there's this whole wing in my house I never knew existed.
Crap, I had something I wanted to say that related to
that. I totally distracted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I've never been more upset than I am right now.
Yeah, rightfully so.
All right, let's go to Superman versus Imperious Lights, what you're doing right now for DC, which is their 2-month event called Future State.
Right. And there's actually 3 issues of that, which is, I'm not sure how they're going to work that for 2 months, but
that is weird. thinking about that. Why
Yeah, it's
wouldn't
a
they just
little
make it free?
But I'm glad they gave me 3 issues because there wasn't enough room to tell the story I wanted to tell in 2. But yeah, basically it's about Superman and Lois Lane have to go to Lexor, this planet that's run by Lex Luthor, because the planet has fallen on some hard times, and they realize that even though it's probably a bad idea to try to bail out Lex Luthor, there's people on that planet who need their help, and it becomes sort of a metaphor for Brexit, or for how nationalism and factionalism is ultimately self-defeating.
Dude, I agree, because when I was first here's the thing about Future State that I'm really confused about is, what is it? I read through all the paragraphs, summaries of each book, and I'm like, I'm confused on the plot. I don't know what's going on. All I know is that Superman got cast out of Earth, and which is totally weird, because if it was an idea of who did it, I'm not trying to pry or anything, but it'd be Lex Luthor, and I was like, all right, Superman versus Imperious Lex would be good. Now Mark Russell's writing it, and I was like, if there's someone to write a corrupt politician or CEO or businessman or whatever, it would probably be you, because you really delve into that with your Flintstones with the guy who owned
Mr. Slate.
Mr. Slate. Thank you. Yeah. If you want to talk about that a bit.
Sure, and I think it's fair to point out that we are not all working from the same continuity for the Future State comics. So we didn't all collaborate on, like, here's the central premise, and other than the fact that these are all possible futures. So one.
So it's not one story at all.
No, it's not like an event in that sense where it's like all connect and they're all like inhabit the same universe. These are different possible futures. So I wrote this without any sort of like knowledge of what was happening in the other Future State comics as they were being written. So in my version, Superman is off Earth, and he is like returns to Earth after several months in space. But the reason why he was out is because he was looking for solutions to help solve this sort of this energy crisis that's affecting all the planets, the United Planets, because they've all agreed to like go off of fossil fuels, and it's set in a not too distant future, like the next 50 years or so, where the United Planets all agree to sort of like give up fossil fuels and commit to solar energy. So they're all building these Dyson spheres around their stars to harness the solar energy. But in the meantime, they're experiencing these like acute power shortages. So Superman's out looking for solutions, and while looking for solutions, he realizes he discovers that Lex Luthor has taken over the planet Lexor, and he is using that as a base from which to plunder other worlds, and has to stop him.
Okay, because I was worried that not really worried, but confused, because if it was Superman, I was like, okay, if he's gone, then is it going to be John Kent? And I'm actually really excited.
My version, which is probably set less far in the future than other Future State titles, it's Clark Kent.
Good.
And Lois Lane is the representative to the United Planets from Earth. So it's sort of their responsibility to find out what's going on Lexor. And
wow. Okay, so I don't even know really what Lexor is. So Lexor is the planet he dominated and calls Lexor, or he already owned the planet?
Lexor is the planet that Lex Luthor sort of showed up to the planet, and because he had all the sophisticated technology, all of his robotics technology that he developed from LexCorp on Earth, he was just kind of seen as like their
superior
leader. Yeah, exactly. Super scientist plus natural leader, and there's sort of a reversal of roles on Lexor, because he controls all the propaganda, and he's like this guy who brought all this wealth to Lexor. Lex Luthor is the big hero, the one everyone worships. It's Superman is seen as the villain.
Oh, dude, that reminds me of Brian Azzarello's Luthor a little bit.
Yeah, right. Same sort of idea. But it's not that Superman's doing anything villainous.
Right.
It's just that he's playing into like Lex Luthor's propaganda.
That's good. And that, dude, propaganda is a big thing when it comes to political biases too.
Right, absolutely.
So seeing this, I'm actually more excited now than when I was, because by the time I got done reading all this stuff, I was like, I'm more confused now, be now that you say it, it's more like, okay, so they're not all connected, so I can just choose the books I want to read and just have fun.
I would feel free to, read, confidently with it. You're going to be able to understand what's going on without having read any of the other titles.
Good.
So just pick and choose the titles you want to read, and I don't think you'll have to it's not like one of these things where at the beginning of the issue, here's like this checklist of like 30 other issues you have to have read in order to make sense of this one issue you're about to read. It's not like that at all. They're all sort of exist independently.
Okay, so now we're done with pretty much all the topics I thought we'd have done. We're going to go into some questions. If anyone has questions in the chat, we will be talking until we get some questions. So if you want to break into comics, how do you do that? I know obviously just start writing, but
yeah, I think that's the key is like, really, it's not like you should just wait until somebody discovers your non-existent body of work and, and then get into comics. It's like you really just got to be creating stuff in whichever way you can, whether it's a web comic or just writing short stories or publishing books that aren't comics. And then just because everything you create is sort of a lottery ticket that the universe gives you. And you never know which one's going to scratch off. In my case, I was able to break into comics despite the fact I couldn't really draw, professional caliber comics, and I had never really even aspired to write comics. But I had written some books that got me the notice of some people in the comics industry, even though they were not themselves comic books. But the thing that really sort of broke me into comics, and this is completely by accident, wasn't by any sort of, great design on my own, was the fact that I was writing Count Chocula fan fiction on my Facebook account.
Oh, wow.
Which happened to be read by DC editor Marie Javins.
Oh, nice.
When she was tasked to find somebody to write the comic book Prez, which was like supposed to be this political satire. And so she thought, oh, what about this guy writing the Count Chocula fan fiction on his Facebook? And so she contacted me, and it worked out for both of us.
That's insane, because you never really know who's gonna.
And that's the thing. It's like you can try to do the traditional path of breaking into comics, but more likely than not, the industry that you end up working in, whether it's the one you want to or not, or whether it's what you planned or not, will probably you'll end up in there, but through some roundabout way like that, just because you put some lottery ticket out in the universe, and somebody you never thought in a million years would notice scratched it off and and offered you something. So, awesome. But the key is like just to be constantly creating, because you never know who's going to read it.
Right. I'm working with. My friend and I are actually writing a book, a comic. And for the past 8 weeks, every Tuesday and Thursday, getting together, and it's also more therapeutic than it is like we were just doing it for like a writer exercise, but because it became therapeutic, we didn't want to miss weeks. We didn't want to miss days. We just wanted to.
That's what a writer is. It's not somebody who has to write. It's somebody who can't not write. It's somebody who's writing just because it medicates themselves. It medicates some part of them. It's not like, well, I want to write a best-selling novel, therefore I will sit down and write this novel. It's just like I just can't help it. This is the way in which I express myself to the universe.
My brain is like that, but even more to the point of a little bit selfish, because it's like I want to put something out there, and even if it's out there and no one reads it, if one person reads it, I'll be okay with it, because I don't want to be forgotten. When we're only here for almost maximum of 100 years to 60 to 100 years. And if I don't do anything to be remembered, I feel like my time here is wasted.
And I feel like, I understand that. And I feel like also this is what, we are here to do, really, is to sort of like, this is what religion essentially is making you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, to make you feel like you have a place in the universe. And I think that's essentially what art does for most people who create art, is even if it's only one person who really loves the painting that you did or loves the short story you wrote, that makes you feel that you're connected to something bigger than yourself, that you have, if only for a moment, joined the great continuing thread of the human conversation we call culture. And
Nice.
that is, it's a form of immortality, but more than that, it's a form of feeling like yes, there's a point to me being here on Earth.
Exactly. Okay, now we got a couple questions in. To Helam29, avid watcher of the channel, what are some of the stories that have inspired you in your own writing? Do you enjoy exploring different genres and stories?
Yeah, there's no genre I don't like. There's like really great things. I think things that like I enjoy in pretty much every genre. I don't even really like to think in terms of genre anymore. I just think about more like in terms of the story you want to tell and what you want to accomplish with that story, and then figure out later what sort of genre it's in. But yeah, there's a lot that really inspired my writing, especially when I was starting and struggling. Things that made me want to write were like Kurt Vonnegut novels or like Mel Brooks.
Slaughterhouse 5, dude.
Yeah, my personal favorite is Breakfast of Champions, and I think that had a huge influence on my style too. Just the sort of brevity of wit in it, and the sort of like condensing, cosmic ideas down to a sentence or two. I think it was hugely influential in my own writing.
I totally agree, because he also did Fahrenheit 451. He took this big idea of corruption and taking away people's freedoms and rights and ideas.
Well, Fahrenheit 451 was actually Ray Bradbury, but
Ray Bradbury, sorry. It's
funny you should say that though, because it's like he's another huge influence on me. I think the first novel I ever read that made me think like I want to write was the Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, because every chapter is like a little short story, and every one's like sort of like a metaphor for colonialism or racism, and he packs so much power into every chapter of that book that I think that it really sort of like resonated with me. Like, this is, if you want to like change the world, if you want to like express yourself to the universe, this is how you do it, through writing.
I was thinking of Harrison Bergeron, by the way.
Oh, right. Yeah. Harrison Bergeron. Right. Yeah. Great short story. One of my favorite Vonnegut shorts.
Yeah. I had to do a couple essays on it, and a couple turned into 4 or 5 because I just kept going back because it was a great book.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd say those are some really big influences on me.
Okay. You know what? I never would have guessed. No, I'm just kidding. I could have guessed that.
Yeah.
Question from Mark. This is by RDV, my other co-host. I have 2 co-hosts for Educating Jimmy. Question from Mark. What is your first comic gig, and who approached you to write it?
As I mentioned earlier, my first comic gig was writing Prez for DC in 2015, and it was Marie Javins.
I don't know it. Is that the Prez Luthor?
No, it's Prez. It was like an update, a modernization of the 1973 Joe Simon comic about Prez Rickard, the first teenage president.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I did an updated version in 2015, which instead of Prez Rickard was this girl named Beth Ross, and it's set about, I think, 20 or 30 years in the future. And it's sort of this pre-dystopian future and she's elected the first president elected by Twitter.
Wow, that makes sense too, because I think, what is it? The number one source of people getting their news is from Twitter, so that would make perfect sense.
Yeah, and she just happens to go viral at just the right moment during the election cycle, so she gets she manages to sneak in and steal the election from the 2 mainstream candidates.
That's funny, because I saw something on Twitter or Facebook the other day saying our 2065 president is probably on Twitter dancing right now.
Yeah. No,
Twitter, TikTok.
Yeah, right. And that's one of the things that's sort of like, one of the premises of like this comic was, I thought, like, I remember like when I was writing this, I thought, whoever's gonna be president in 2034 or 2040 or whatever, they probably already have like nude pictures of themselves on the internet somewhere. They probably have like sent selfies or sex or something. So we're probably just gonna have to get used to the fact that like presidents have this sort of compromising this compromising past that's been recorded on the internet somewhere for all posterity. And in fact, at the first issue of Prez, the incumbent president has to step down because all these sort of compromising photos of him have been discovered.
The idea of that is so uncanny. Last question. It's more personal, I guess. Is you write about dystopias a lot, and obviously everyone knows those are bad based off the name. But I also have this theory that utopias are also systemically bad, also, because every utopia that has tried to be, every country or city or anything that's even in literature has tried to be a utopia has always been a dystopia.
Well, I think there are really two kinds of civilizations. There's dystopias and then there's pre-dystopias. And that's not to be gloomy. It's just to say that any civilization that's not a dystopia has to work hard at not becoming one.
Right.
And there's work to be done, and you have to be constantly vigilant to make sure that the weeds don't come up through the cracks and strangle your democracy or your civilization that is currently not a dystopia. Because every civilization, whether through neglect of its people or through active malintent of people who want to govern it, is on its way to becoming a dystopia unless we stop it.
Exactly. Like, I think utopias could be bad, but the strive to be a utopia is what a country should be.
I don't think there's any such thing as a utopia. What I do think is that there are people within civilizations who are striving to keep it from becoming a dystopia. And that's, in doing so, they move toward a utopia. But it's not like a civilization ever really achieves the status of utopia, because it's always just waiting to become a dystopia if, as soon as people stop trying to prevent that.
Like in Harrison Bergeron, we'll go back to that. Harrison Bergeron, everyone was equal physically also. Like, some people were too beautiful. They had to put on a mask. Some people were too strong. They had to wear chains.
Right. And the good ideas one day turn out to be the problems that you need to solve the next.
Exactly.
Like the introduction of like gasoline and fossil fuels was an immense boon to the physical environment of cities when the 1920s and 30s, because before then cities were just choked with like horse manure and hay, and the burning smoke from like chimneys, they were almost unlivable. They were just like these sort of filthy, disease-ridden, pollution born like hell pits. And then like electricity.
They had poop scoopers on the streets as job workers.
True. Great job if you ever are looking for one. But then like the fact that we had fossil fuels and electricity at the beginning was like a major boon, because suddenly you don't need all these horses on the street. Suddenly you don't need to burn coal or wood in the chimneys. You can have electric heating in the houses, and the city's got immeasurably cleaner. But now these are the burning fossil fuels for like energy for your cars and for electricity is threatening the planet. So yesterday's solution has become today's problem, and whatever we use to solve those problems will probably itself need some amending 30 or 40 years down the road. So like I said, it's just constant maintenance. There's no such thing where it's like we have now arrived as a society.
Exactly. Last question from the chat before we wrap up. What is your favorite dystopia story you are most proud of writing? My thought would be Judge Dredd. For me, it's Billionaire Island. I haven't read that yet. I'm waiting for it to come out in graphic novel form to buy it.
I think it's like easily one of the best things I've written, and it's one of the most sort of like off the wall satires I've written, and it's set like in a sort of near future dystopian environment.
It came out during the time Epstein. Is it sort of similar to that? Like a guy who has the most power, so he has an island of just corruption.
Yeah, well, the premise is that there's this island, the artificial island created in the Gulf of Mexico by billionaires, from which to escape the end of the world that they have caused. But in going there, they realize that there's no laws. They're not subject to American laws. So they open offshore banks. They have like human gladiatorial contests. They like this Harvey Weinstein-esque character goes there to set up his own movie studio, which he literally calls "Don't Give a Shit Studios." because they can hire all the actors who've been disgraced by the Me Too movement and stuff out there. So it's very much about like people going there precisely because they are they are not beholden to any sort of norms or morality.
Oh man, that's awesome! I can't wait to read that. So, any other future DC plans after Imperious Lex?
Yeah, nothing I can really announce, but there's something I'm working on for them that I'm very excited about, and hopefully we'll be able to announce it soon.
Awesome. And
Marvel too, a big Marvel project coming out soon too.
Ooh, that's exciting. Mark, thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk. Really appreciate it. Also, just to get in your head a little bit is really awesome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Jimmy. This was great.
Yeah, no problem. All right, everyone, like, subscribe. Thank you for joining. I will see you next week with Brian Edward Hill, which is going to be the 8th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. I was really surprised he said yes.
Yeah,
too.
Great writer. Loved American Carnage.
And also his mind, too, on the concept of writing is really what I want to mainly talk about.
He's very Jedi-esque. He's just a smart guy.
Exactly. So join me next week when we talk with Brian Edward Hill, and Thursdays for Educating Jimmy. We will see you later. Have a good one, guys.